while the baffle and motor mount tubes are drying within the body tube, we can work on the fins here. Okay, and so these are going to go together like this. So these outer fins will go into these little pegs, like that. And this part will go against the rocket. And then these little squares here will eventually shape into ailerons, which will go on here. Now before we do all that, we're going to want to treat the wood. You don't have to, but if you want to get rid of all the grain lines, it's going to be a lot easier this way. So what I recommend first is to simply sand the surfaces down with fine sandpaper. About 150 grit works well. And if you use a sanding tee or sanding block, this will help keep the surface flat. So here, I'm just going to sand with the grain. And this is just going to remove any large imperfections on the surface. Flip that over. Okay, and then go ahead and do the edges here, just enough to take the soot off from the laser cutting. Okay, for this tip edge here, you might get a little bit in there, but you're better off not sanding it if you're going to end up bonking these things off. So depending on how careful you are there. Okay, and I'm just going to do that with the other fins here off camera. Once the fins are sanded, we have a couple of options here. So if you want to make this as close to the scale model as you can, we're going to need to taper the leading edges of the main wings as well as the tip wings here, and also the ailerons. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can simply round the leading edges, and that will be fine. The advantage to rounding rather than tapering is you get a stronger edge. With these knife edge tapers that we're going to be putting on here, there's an increased risk of chipping if the rocket makes a hard landing. So whichever you choose to do. And then also, you'll probably want to use some sort of sanding sealer to fill in the remaining grain of the fins. Again, it's not necessary, it will fly without it, but using the sanding sealer will give you a smoother appearance once the fins are painted. Personally, I am going to be using this sanding sealer from R.E.A.R. It's an emulsion type, so it's water cleanup, but it dries kind of like polyurethane. I don't know exactly what they put in this stuff. And what I'm going to do is give it a coat before I sand the edges, and then I'm going to go ahead and shape all the edges, and then I'll give it another coat, possibly two, and sand those off again. And one of the things you can do to speed this up is have yourself some straight pins handy here. And what I'm going to do is just poke one or two of these into the edge of a fin. Alright, you don't have to go very far, and definitely you don't want to poke your finger. Okay, I'm just going to wipe off any remaining dust here. And then you can apply this either with a cotton applicator or a disposable brush or just about anything here. Alright, so I'm just going to lay a film on. And you want to try and keep this even, but it's not critical. But But this is soaking into all of the grooves of the grain and filling them up, and then when we sand it, we'll sand off the upper surface, and that'll leave a smoother surface behind. And then you just continue doing that. If you want a really nice smooth finish, probably about 3 coats in total. As I said, I'm going to give 1 coat here before I taper the fins, and then I'll seal the tapers. If you prefer to go ahead and shape your fins first and then seal it, there's nothing wrong with that. Part of the time I do it one way, part I do another, and either I can't determine or I just don't remember which way works absolutely the best. And a lot of it just depends on what else I'm doing at the time. So how many things am I trying to multitask? Alright, now here's where the pin comes in handy, is this way I don't get my hands all gooey. And then, to let this dry, you can get yourself a small cardboard box, or just a corrugated piece of cardboard here. In this case, this is a motor that I glued onto a piece of cardboard to act as a rocket stand. I can just put this on its edge like this, and then I slide that pin down in the corrugation holes. And that will allow this to dry without being plastered onto a surface. Okay, so I'm going to do this same thing with the remaining fin pieces, and then come back when they're all dry to sand and shape them. The first coat of sanding sealer has dried, and so now I'm just going to smooth this out again using some 150, you could also use 220 grit sandpaper here. But since this is the first coat here, I just want to sand it smooth again. Okay, so this smooths it out again. There's still porosity to the wood here, so it's going to need another coat or two. A little bit there. But what I'm going to do next is shape the fins to put the tapers on everywhere. So I'm going to sand the surfaces of the other fins, and then we'll start shaping these. All of my fin pieces are sanded now. And for the next part we need this fin sanding guide. Now if you don't want to go for the strict scale fin edges here, you can simply round off the leading edges of the 2 main fins here, and then also round off the leading edges of the side fins, the tip fins, and it will fly just perfectly with that. Okay, but if you want to go with the actual scale model look here, then we're going to put a taper here on the main fin on both sides. So that'll be 0.3 inches. Now unfortunately, very few rulers actually have tenths of an inch on them, so we'll need to convert that. But that will go on both edges here, so that in cross section this will be a knife edge. Okay, and then for the tip fins here, the leading edge here will only have, let's see here, the leading edge will only be tapered on one side. The trailing edges will be tapered on both sides there. Okay, and then the ailerons here, these will be tapered all the way back. Okay, and they're not completely straight. They're actually a little bit narrower at one edge. So the narrower edge here will remain blocked, and then we'll taper out the wider edge here on both sides. So I went through and converted the decimal inches into millimeters here. So 0.3 inches is 7 millimeters, and then the 0.1 inch is 2.5 millimeters. And so what I'm going to do here is simply measure inward here. So this is going to be 7 millimeters right there. And I'll just come a little bit further down. Square that off there. And another 7 millimeters there. Okay, and then I'm just going to draw a light pencil line right down this edge. Okay, now we will need to be careful that we don't sand off this tab, and also want to be careful here that we keep this part square while also tapering from the base forward there. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Alright, so that's that fin. Okay, now we need to mark these tip fins as being inward and outward surfaces. So I'm just going to put a light I here, a little O there. It doesn't matter which side you pick as long as you just remember to do it consistently. Okay. So on the inward surface, this surface, all we're going to do is taper the trailing edge. But we'll taper both sides of it. Alright, so this is getting pretty small, so 2.5 millimeters is about there. I'll just bring that up to just past the vertex of the fin there. Okay, and then mark there and draw in the other side. Okay, so these will both be tapered on both sides. On the outward surface then, alright, the rear trailing edge again will be the same. So that's 2.5 millimeters. And then we'll also taper the leading edge, but only on one side. So this will taper all the way to the other side there. This is also 2.5 millimeters. Alright, so we've got our taper lines there and on the inner surface, and the same thing here on our main wing. And so off camera I'm going to make the same markings for the other sets here. And then again, the ailerons here we're going to taper all the way from the front to the back, and the back edge is the wider of the two. So I'm going to go off camera here and come back when I've got everything else marked. I've now marked all of my pieces, and to start this I'm going to use some 100 grit sandpaper, and just start working the edge and slowly taking this down. If you want, you might even be able to use 80 grit for at least the initial shaping. But remember, this is balsa, so it's going to move fairly quickly. Now, that's not tapered a whole lot yet. This is going to take some time to do, so be patient. Take breaks if you need to, if your wrist starts getting sore. I'm going to take the majority of this off camera and come back when I've got it mostly done. I've sanded the taper into this fin, and so you can see where it just gone to where I erase my guideline there. Okay, and although I tried to avoid it, I did sand a little bit of this tab here. It's not too critical. I can fill that in with a little bit of wood filler once we get the tip fin glued on there. And I didn't come to a complete knife edge here. I left just a little bit of the edge on, mainly for strength, so this will be less likely to get chipped if it lands a little bit wrong. Okay, now I just need to do the same thing on the other main fin, and then I'll move on to the tip fins. At this point, I have shaped all of my fins here, so the two main wings and then the tip fins. Now you may notice here I didn't make this a complete taper down to the bottom. I left a little bit of the edge there, and I'm doing that mainly for strength. Again, if one of the drawbacks of going down to a full knife edge on these things is they do tend to chip that way. So I made a little compromise there. Okay, same thing here. And then the back edges also, I left just a little bit of the edge on there. So those are good. Here are my ailerons, nicely shaped. And now what I'm going to do is give everything another coat or two of sanding sealer, and then sand that down again before we mount the fins to themselves and then also to the body tube. So I'm going to do that part off camera. I've put on and sanded down again another coat of the sanding sealer. And if you can see here carefully, there's just a little bit of a sheen left. And that's what we're looking for. There should not be an overcoat of sealer. But after sanding, you should still be able to see it in the lowest spots here. Now, if I really wanted to make this ultra smooth, I'd probably give it one more coat here and sand that again. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave it at 2 coats and depend more upon the primer to fill in the rest. Now our next step is to glue the ailerons to the main wings here. And according to the instructions, one corner is supposed to be rounded. And I'm not really seeing that here. However, one side is tapered so that it will go against the tail cone here. Alright, so you want to make sure you've got that. And then if you need to, you can go ahead and round off a corner there to fit in. I'm just going to make sure that I've got the best side up here. Okay, so I'm going to round off this one just a little bit. Just a brief touch of sandpaper there. Okay, so that's going to go like that, and then that makes a nice smooth transition there. This one fits, but I'm going to go ahead and round it just a little bit. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is simply glue these together. And I'm going to put a little piece of foil underneath them so I don't stick it to my work mat here. So here I'm just going to take a little bit of glue and glue the edge here. Now, to make this more realistic, I am not going to glue this edge, so that we've actually got that little tiny gap there, and that's going to make it look much more like an aileron. We actually want to have a little bit of a seam in here. Now, for structural reasons, I don't want to leave a seam on the main connection there, but I can leave one over there on the side. And here the main thing to make sure of is that this remains flat and in the same plane as the wing itself. We don't want these to be sticking up or down, because that could either cause the rocket to veer off to one side or cause it to spin. So here I'm just going to do the second one. Okay, that one's actually got a little more room in it, so I'm going to bring it over just a bit. Okay. Now I'm going to let this dry for 15 to 20 minutes so that I can work with them without the hazard of having the ailerons fall off. While the wood fins are drying, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and attach the canard fins. Now the first thing we need to do is make sure this hole on the nose cone is clean. I already pushed the plasticine clay out of the way, but the process of sanding the nose left some sanding dust in here. And so I'm just going to clean that out here with the handle of one of my applicators. Okay, and then we want to dry fit these on, and this may actually take a little bit of doing here. Okay, so these are just a little bit larger than my holes are. Yeah, there's not even some wiggle room there. So you can fix this either by drilling this hole out a little bit or by sanding down the peg here. And I'm going to do the latter. There we go. Alright, so that should be nice and snug. There is an actual forward and aft end to this, and you'll be able to see it if you turn it around backwards. It will not fit against the noses tightly. Okay, so I'm going to dry fit that there, and then do the same on the other side with my other canard fin here. It too is going to need some sanding. Okay, so that's nice and snug there. Now we're going to want to make sure that as we sight down the nose cone that these are straight, because these can really cause some instability if they are out of line at all. Okay. Now the instructions suggest using plastic model cement here. If you don't have that, the super glue would probably work as well. And because mine is actually fitting really snugly in here, I'm going to use a little bit of super glue, and I'm just going to let that run in along the seam there. And first I'm making sure I got all the plastic fuzz off of this. You can sand these if you want. I kind of like the residual texture of the 3D printing. Okay. So here, I'm just going to take a little bit of super glue and just let that run in by capillary action there. Okay, and do it on both sides. A little bit of excess dust yet. Okay, and then do the same for the other fin. Okay, you can do the same technique if you have some of the brush-on plastic cement. That would work as well. And I'm going to let this dry horizontally for a while so that the super glue does not run from one end to the other. The glue on my ailerons has dried, and now I'm just going to give it a little bit of sanding here to make sure that everything is smoothly transitioning. Okay, so you may have noticed I was changing directions. That's so I could get with the grain on both of them. Okay, and notice that this has got a little bit different taper. So I'm going to go ahead and shape that a bit more just so it doesn't become a spinner-on. Okay, and then do the same thing with the other aileron here. Alright, also check the taper here. And then our last part of the assembly here is to glue the tip fins on. And first I'm just going to dry fit and make sure that we don't have any excess sanding sealer which might interfere here. Okay, we do want them to be snug. Okay, so that one looks pretty good. And when you put these on, make sure that you've got the inner and outer surfaces here. So I've got this little O that's still on this, so it's the outer surface. Should be facing out. Okay, and then again, try fit these on. Okay, this has got a little bit too much thickness there, so I'm just going to very carefully just sand a little bit. Probably due to the sanding sealer. That's better. Okay, now there is, you can see there's still some recession here, and I will fill that in with wood filler when the rest of this is finished. Okay, so I'm going to just get a little bit of the stuff out of there. Okay, and then to put these on, we're going to put some glue on the edge there and then press that into place. And here I'm going to use an applicator to apply the glue. just so I've got a little bit more control. Alright, and excuse me, as with our other gluings of fins that you would see in a more typical model rocket, we don't want a really thick layer of glue to start with, because it'll tend to get soupy and less controlled. Alright, we want something that's going to tack up quickly and dry quickly. So there, I'm just going to press these together. Okay, and the critical thing now is making sure that that is perpendicular and that it stays that way. Alright, and you might find it easier to lay this down and then sight from the back of it. And then if you have a small triangle, square, or a small block of something perpendicular and heavy, you can put that in. In my case here, I'm going to use this little miter box. And I can just put that right up against it to keep it square. And then once this dries, we'll put in some fillets to strengthen everything, and I'll do the other fin set off camera here. Once the fin assemblies are dry, go ahead and apply fillets to the insides of the joints here. So I'm just going to apply some glue here. Now we want to avoid getting glue down into this little joint of the aileron. That's actually supposed to be a little bit open there to give it a more realistic look. Okay, and I'm just going to take a finger here and smooth that in. And I'm just going to take a little dowel here to clean that little bit out. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Alright, and then we'll do the same thing on the other fin off camera. The fillets on my fins have dried, and they all look in pretty good condition there. And here on the edge or tip fins here, again, I will fill these holes in with some wood filler a little bit later on. We're getting ready to put them on the body tube now, and so remember the fin lines are each 90 degrees away from the launch lug line here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just line this up. Okay, and there's this little teeny burn mark. It's almost let's see if I can get this up close enough here. Okay, so right here, it almost just looks like a discoloration of the wood, but that is the alignment spot for the fin. So that should go right where the fins meet the transition there on the tail cone. Okay, and while we've got that there, I'm going to check the length here, and I'm just going to make a little tick mark where the top of my fin will be. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. So Again, I'm going to line my little tick mark there. Okay, just give a little mark there. This is just going to tell me how far up I need to sand the body to. So here I'm going to use some 150 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand along the lines here where the fins will attach. And this is just roughening up the glossy surface of the glassine on the cardboard tube here, and it'll give a better grip for the glue to attach to the body. Okay, now if you've sanded your line away, go ahead and just redraw that on. Now, almost ready to put the fins on. I highly recommend using a fin alignment guide that fits over the tube for this step. I'm going to use this fin alignment guide. This particular one is made by Apogee Components. There are other manufacturers out there as well, but this works by sliding over the body tube and then down to wherever you need it to be to hold your fins in place. Now the other reason, if you purchase and plan to build a lot of Rocketarium kits, virtually all of their kits are based on a BT60 body tube. And so really you can just get two of these, one for the 4-fin and one for the 3-fin, and you're set to build most of their kits. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and insert this here and line it up along one of my fin lines. There we go. Okay, and then our fin again is going to simply go on here. And we're going to line up that little tick mark again, and then I'm going to take the other fin here, and this is just seeing how everything is going to look. I'll put it in place as well. Again, bringing that tick mark up to the body tube. Okay, I'm not seeing any problems here, so we can go ahead and glue this. Now, because of the plastic tail cone, we're going to use two different glues here in order to put the fins on. Okay, so we're going to apply wood glue here to the upper part of the root edge. Okay, I just want a thin film here. I'll smooth this out in just a moment. And you have to work fairly quickly with this part. And this is also why I recommend having that fin alignment guide. Is my usual procedure of letting this get tacky on both sides is going to be harder to do. Okay, and then I'm going to need some thick cyanoacrylate glue to go between the fin and the plastic. So here I'm going to put this on the lower part. And the reason I'm using the thick glue here is so that it doesn't just soak into the wood. Right? I am not gluing the aileron. Okay, so once we've gotten this in place, I'm simply going to put this through the alignment guide. Okay, I'm going to re-center that, make sure I'm on my line. Okay, come up just a bit. Okay, so right there. Alright, now I'm going to check and make sure I'm still aligned everywhere, which I appear to be. Okay, and I'm just going to give this a gentle squeeze. Okay, and I've got a little super glue that moved on me down here. Okay, now I hadn't intended to glue the aileron, but it's stuck on there. It's not a big deal, since they're not actually operating ailerons. All right, I'm going to let that dry for about 10 minutes, and then off camera I'll put the other wing on as well. The main wings are dry, and now I'm going to apply fillets here along the body tube and the wing. And I will also recheck the tip wings and such and make sure they don't need a little touch up on their fillets while I'm doing this. Alright, so I'm just going to put a bead of glue all the way down this. Okay. And go ahead and just use wood or white glue for the fillet on the plastic. It won't stick all that well, although the printed texture on that will help a little bit. Okay, and I'm just going to smooth this all the way up. Okay. And then the same thing on the other side. Alright, and I'm going to let this dry for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll flip it over and do the fillets on the other sides of the fins, but I'll do that off camera. While the fillets are drying on the wings, we can come back to the nose cone and the canard fins. We actually did this earlier while waiting for fins to dry, but we're back to this point in the instructions. And I did notice a couple of things on mine that could be of trouble, if at the most. At the least, it's going to have an aesthetic appearance problem here. And that is, if you look at this squarely, the hole on this side of the nose cone is a little bit higher up, a little bit more forward than the one here. And it's also not quite 180 degrees from its neighbor here. And so it looks like they're a little lopsided, just front to back. And if you look at it in profile, you can see that this one looks a little bent down compared to the other. So to fix this, you can do a few things. One is just ignore it. It's probably not off enough to really affect the flight too much, especially given the weight of this nose. You could also try re-drilling the holes, but that may present its own problems. For one, that it's probably not far enough away from the original hole to be able to drill a new hole straight and have it sound. In which case you could also cut off the pegs on these things and mount them freely like you would any other fin. You're going to want to be really careful about getting things aligned that way, though. Okay, so there are some options there. For now, since I didn't even notice this till after everything was glued together, I'm just going to continue with the build as is. Now that the fin fillets have dried, or at least mostly dried, we can go ahead and put on the launch lugs. Make sure you're on the right line. So this is my launch lug line. The other line is for the channel and has the channel base of the boat tail there. So we want to keep it on this side. So we're going to make a few measurements here again. So from the top of the boat tail, the first launch lug should go here at 3 3/8 inches. Right there. And then the second one at 8 inches. So it's going to be right there. Alright, and then we can take and measure roughly where that launch lug is going to be. And I'm going to go ahead and roughen that up a little bit. Okay, and then the same thing up here. I don't have to be exact. Okay, be careful you don't press down too hard on that, you might break a wing off. And then I'll do the same thing for the launch lugs themselves. Okay, and then all we have to do is add a bead of glue here. Okay, and I'm just going to press that right on the line where we did our sanding. And now I'm going to sight down this to make sure everything's lined up. And then I'll do the same thing with the second launch lug. That should do it. So once again, we'll set this aside to let the launch lugs dry, and we're getting close to the end of the construction here. The glue on my launch lugs is dry, and so now I'm going to add fillets in much the same way that I did with the fins. So I'll just take some more wood glue here and run a bead on either side and then smooth that in. Okay. Just do a quick check. Make sure I haven't got a gluey finger somewhere. That looks good. For our next step, I'm going to glue the channel piece here onto the rocket, and this is going to fit over the starting point there of the tail cone and then extend upward here. Okay, and we'll want to center it on our line. And this can be put on simply with a bead of wood glue here. And I want to have some control over this because I really just want to glue the edges. So I'm going to use an applicator here. I want to be very careful that I don't get glue at either end of that, as that would get in the way of the plastic pieces. Alright, I'm just going to lay this down. Okay, and then check to make sure it's centered. Got a little bit of glue that got away from me here. Next we need to add this piece. This is the half cone that goes onto the channel there. And for this we're going to want to use some thick cyanoacrylate glue. Okay. And the instructions show putting this on after the tube has been put on the main body tube. I don't see any reason why you couldn't put the nose cone onto the channel tube first, and I think that actually might make installation a little easier. But we'll go with what we have here. Okay, now I'm going to, kind of like I did with the channel itself, I'm going to put a thin film here along the edge. Okay, and then I'm also going to put some right inside the channel here, just at its edge. It's actually far more glue than I need, but that's about the only way to get it in there. Okay, now I don't want to just slide this in, because then I'll have a trail of glue going. I'm going to put this in starting here. Still came out a little bit gluey. Okay, and I don't want to slide it in so far that the shoulder gets, or it goes past the shoulder here. So a little bit of a gap, but the super glue is already setting there. So I will just fill that in with a little bit of model putty later on. Here the glue has dried on the channel, and I've applied some fillets here in just the same manner that you would for fins. And then up here at the nose, where I had that little gap, I applied some plastic model putty, like this stuff here. And so I'll just give that a little bit of sanding before I'm ready to put the primer on. While the launch lug fillets are drying, we can go ahead and assemble the parachute, most of which has been done for us. So we just need to separate out the 3 loops of shroud lines here and gather those together. So what I'm going to do now is, in one hand, I'm going to grab the middle of the parachute here, which is right there. Okay, and in the other hand, I've got the loops of the shroud lines here. And now I'm going to just gently adjust each side of those loops until all of these corners are approximately the same place. All right, so they should all be positioned roughly equal to each other. It doesn't have to be exact, and it probably won't be. Okay, but get them close. Now, if you want to follow the instructions and permanently attach this to the nose cone, then take those loops of the shroud lines. And you always want to be grabbing them at some point so that they don't change length on us. Okay, and then you can either open up the loops here and pass the entire parachute through it, or you can pass the nose cone through it. Alright, and then you just gently pull that up and then snug it up against there to form a knot. Now I'm not going to do that completely because, as any of you who have watched my videos before know, I hate, absolutely hate, permanently attaching parachutes to nose cones. Alright, so once again, I've reclaimed my loops here. Alright, grabbing the parachute in the middle once more. Alright, so now I've got my shroud lines the same size once again. And now I'm going to take that loop, and I'm going to take a snap swivel here. Now these are what most people find in fishing stores and such. You can find them in sporting goods stores and department stores, even some convenience stores. Okay, it's got a snap side and a swivel side. We want to put the loops through the eyelet of the swivel side. Okay, and just pass that through enough to make a loop that we can now pass the entire snap swivel through. All right, and then just pull the loop down, and then we're going to pull it up snug to make a knot on the bottom there. All right, and you can go back and check that nothing has moved significantly. If it has, you can simply loosen that knot again and reposition it. Once you've got the knot where it should be to keep all your lines the way you want them, then just take a little dab of white glue or wood glue and put it right on the knot. There we go. Okay. Don't even need that much. I'm just going to work that in. And this is just going to keep this knot from coming undone, because if it does, then your shroud line lengths will change. Alright, so don't stuff this into your rocket yet. Let that dry. But now to attach this, you simply take the snap portion and clip that onto the nose cone eyelet. And this is really the most important thing about selecting your snap swivel. The swivel side will handle the weight of this rocket and any rocket of this size and class. It's the snap that you have to have big enough to fit around the eyelet. So depending on the rocket and the nose cone manufacturer, some have bigger eyelets, some have smaller ones. And so you'll need to find a snap swivel that has a snap big enough to hook into place on whatever size eyelet you have. Okay? Now I'm going to let this finish drying, and assuming we get the launch lug fillets dry here in a few more minutes, we'll go ahead and attach the shock cord. So simply put the end of your shock cord through the nose cone eyelet, and then tie a couple of overhand knots there. Okay. If you're using the rubber ones, make sure you do a pull test from each end, and then with both of them together to make sure that everything is tight. I do the same thing on the Kevlar, but it's not quite as critical as it doesn't stretch. Okay, and then you want to put a dab of glue on your knot here. Now, if this is rubber, use wood glue or white glue. If it is Kevlar, put on just a little touch of super glue here. Just let it soak into the knot there. And you may also want to put some on the free end here. So notice how it's fraying there already. I'm going to put a little bit below the fray. And then I'll cut that off through the glued section, and I'll have a nice clean cut. With either shock cord, if this is extending out beyond the radius here of the nose cone and up onto the shoulder, you want to cut that off. Because you don't want to get your shock cord caught up here between the body tube and the shoulder. So usually I cut this off at about a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters or so. That'll give us enough that it doesn't pull through the knot, but not so much that it gets caught up here. So here's the structurally completed model. All of the parts have been added and all the glue is dried. This just needs painting. Now I'm going to end this part of the video here. I do intend to have a part 3 which will include the painting and the decal work, but that's going to have to wait for the appropriate weather to come back to my part of the country here. And so stay tuned for that, and if you don't get to watch that one, go ahead and do this on your own, and I hope you have a great flight with it.